Serious, teachers of Reddit, what red flags have you seen in your students? What happened? Once had a parent find out that I'm gay, and b, I have some music industry contacts. They immediately offered me unlimited, unsupervised access to their 16-year-old son in exchange for helping him break into the music business. I was 35. I reported them immediately. You wouldn't believe how many red flags I've seen. I don't know how many times I've had to call CPS. The one that comes to mind is when I was testing a first grader. It was a warm day and this tiny little boy was wearing this really ragged sweatshirt. I see on his wrist some sort of mark. I ask him to pull his sleeve up. He immediately pulls his sleeves down and refuses to speak to me. I got that sinking feeling. So I walk him down to the nurse and have her talk to him. He takes off his sweatshirt and he just has chunks of flesh missing and healed over. She brushes it off and says he's picking at himself. Well, these chunks were at least 1/4 of an inch deep. So I discussed this with the principal. He had no spine at all, so I had to call CPS. Not that I wasn't anyway at this point. Well, CPS tells the parents who called, though I asked to be anonymous, and I get the letter that the claims were unfounded. To me, there should have been something that was done. Even if there was no abuse, he should have had a doctor look at it so it would heal. The family caused several problems at the school, such as the time he went missing because the brother picked him up at recess by sneaking him off campus. I taught a kid about 15 years ago who was just a tough kid. There were times when he wasn't so bad, but he was known around our high school as a troublemaker. Teachers dreaded having him in their class. I survived my year with him and we actually parted ways on decent terms. After high school, I would run into him every now and again, as he was dating the daughter of someone I knew relatively well. I was told that it wasn't a healthy relationship, which didn't really surprise me. A couple of years later, it's summer vacation and I'm just waking up and turn on the TV. The big news story is about a police shooting in our town. The police responded to a domestic violence call and ended up having to shoot and kill the suspect. My former student, a family member, later told me what happened. Neighbors heard screaming and called the police. Police found the girlfriend holding their 6-month-old, cowering in a corner. He was on the other side of the room, holding a butcher knife. Police told him to put down the knife, and his last words were, "Okay, I'll put it down, right after I kill the bee," at which point he charged towards his girlfriend with the knife raised, and the police were forced to shoot him. I can't say I was surprised, but it still made me sad. Sadder still, the baby grew up emotionally, mentally disturbed, due to all the drugs his mother did during her pregnancy. Last I heard, she dumped the kid on her parents and is now a stripper in Vegas. Whoa, yet another case in support of early intervention for mental health issues in schools. Sigh. Teaching a kid right now that one of my colleagues jokingly said about if anyone is going to shoot up our school, it's that kid. He is rather quiet, looks a little off, and can be out of tune with his social skills. He was tested to have a high IQ but never really shows it, doesn't like anything with more challenge. In short, something in him raises red flags. He is not angry, sad, evil, nothing like that. It is more as if there is a small black hole in your classroom that sucks up any connection, attention, looks you throw its way. Hope these red flags turn out to be nothing more than a general uneasy feeling. ETA. I absolutely did not agree with this statement made by my younger colleague and have told him so. I really do not believe this kid would harm anyone on purpose. ETA 140 days after first comment. Things are going well. Kid is more open nowadays. Had lots of conversations with him but also with the whole class about being a group. He seems much more approachable these days and sometimes even volunteers little parts of conversation. He hasn't done a 180 or anything, but I feel a little better about where things are now. Dude, talk to him. A little bit of kindness, as opposed to ridicule, would go a long way. It can genuinely prevent someone from going over the edge. So, I work in an elementary school in a very rough neighborhood. It gets way too real all the time. I think the first time this happened was when I witnessed a group of kindergartners very casually discussing the times they'd seen people get shot. This is my mom's first year teaching 2nd grade. She has 15 years in 5th grade and 7 as an administrator. This year she got by far the worst student she's ever had in a class. This girl is failing in every subject, reads at a kindergarten level at best, and just can't seem to grasp anything. Last night they had an assignment where they had to look at a basic graph and fill in a corresponding table. The graph was on trees. For each category in the table she wrote dog. Where she really stands out is the behavior problems. Bullies the other kids constantly. Just this week she threw a kid on the ground and screamed names at him like jerk, idiot, bully, demon because he asked to play with the girl she was with at recess. She's also incredibly manipulative. My mom has reached out to her mom many times. She has come to realize the mom is a huge part of the problem. She makes up excuses for everything. My favorites include how her daughter couldn't complete her homework because she and her boyfriend got into a car crash. The student had a totally different story. According to her, she completed the homework but didn't bring it, and her mom making up a peanut allergy for God knows why. Long story short is we don't know the fully story yet, but it's a lot worse than originally thought. My mom assumed the girl just had some learning issues and possible ADHD, but has come to find out that her home life is awful. Her dad is in prison. Her mom has a boyfriend even though she hasn't left the husband. The mom is just as clueless as her daughter. The principal and school psychologist have both got involved, but nothing seems to be working. Every day there's more stories about her bullying both verbally and physically other students. The mom is attempting to get mine in trouble with the school because she picks on her daughter. Student told me if he failed his class his father would beat him. I asked him how often that happened, and he told me it happened a lot. I asked him what he meant, like spanking or punching, and he made punching motions. I asked him if he thought that was okay, and he told me, yes, my father loves me and wants me to do well. He wants me to be better. We talked through that learning process and asked if he believed it was a good way. He did not. I asked him if he was scared or needed help. He told me he was okay. He was a child, like 8-13 range. I don't really know the extent or if he was exaggerating, but the messed up part is I teach somewhere where everyone beats their kids. It's legal and common practice. Parents can do whatever they want to their kids. I talked to my department head and they were waiting for me to tell them the problem, not even looking at me funny, just not understanding that this was a problem. The kid wasn't the best student and he looked like he wanted to cry when I marked his homework. This led to me finding out why he was scared. I don't see that student anymore. It's weird, people here don't usually talk to their children. The poor don't have the time and have their uneducated parents raise them. The rich hire nannies. A local teacher told me it was good the father was interested. I get that I'm being ethnocentric here, but dang, it's hard not to pull a kindergarten cop punch out. TLDR. Students looked like he was about to cry and pass out. Was scared his father would beat him. Kid in elementary school who is just so angry all the time for no reason. He doesn't seem to feel any empathy for others. He saw another kid crying because they were upset about something and he just sat there smiling. I was giving a lesson one day and he walked over to ask a question as I'm giving the class instructions, and I asked him to sit down and I'd help him in just a minute. He stomped back to his seat yelling about how he hates me in this school because no one cares and we're all useless. This is a nearly daily occurrence. If you tell him he has to do something he doesn't want to do, he will yell, throw things and generally just melt down. He can't deal with life in a typical way. He always seems to be scowling. I feel bad for him because it has to be hard to be him. That kid really needs a therapist like yesterday. Lots of the usual about abuse, mental illness, poverty, etc. The one a lot of folks may not know about is the phone numbers. If a parent can't be bothered to keep a way to contact them updated with the school, we're going to be dealing with a headache of a student for the year. 20 years ago I had a kid in my kindergarten class that kicked my hamster. It was in one of those plastic ball things. He was a mean angry kid. He is in jail now. Sadly you could see it coming even then. Honestly, the kids I've taught who've gotten into serious trouble, one in particular was just sentenced to 6 years for rape, never showed any red flags. That's the scariest thing about teaching in my opinion. Poor hygiene always makes me wonder what the home life is like. I mean, some 14-year-olds just stink. But when their hair is consistently greasy, teeth unbrushed, dirty and long fingernails, makes your heart break a little. Throwaway account for obvious reasons, But I was that kid when I was in school. I always had really poor social skills and never really got along with other kids. By the time I reached high school, I started to get picked on by older guys. I was always a very lonely person, but soon my loneliness turned into anger and hatred for every single person in that school. Something inside me just snapped after a while. I became a really violent person. If anyone said anything remotely rude or mean to me, I wouldn't hesitate to punch them in the face and kick the living crap out of them. I became totally obsessed with the two Columbine kids, mainly because I truly wanted to make everyone who had ever wronged me in the past suffer. I remember whenever we had to do writing assignments or stuff like that, I would always write really fricked up stuff about killing or hurting people. I will fully admit I was completely disturbed and had some serious mental health problems going on at the time. I have to credit my grade 9 English teacher for saving my life. I remember one day he called me in after class just to talk, which was weird because I had always gotten the impression he hated me. Basically what he did was, after reading my latest assignment, had called my parents and helped them set me up with some professional help. He told me that when he saw me, he saw a very bright young man, but one who was incredibly disturbed emotionally, and that he didn't want me to make a mistake that I would end up regretting. Thank you so much, Brian. If you are reading this, I got the professional help I needed, transferred schools, and I'm now getting a university degree. You most likely ended up stopping me from hurting myself or others around me and my family, and I was always be in an eternal debt to you. You only knew me for a year, but you made an impact on my life that will last forever. My mum is a primary school teacher in Ireland, and she taught a kid in the 90s I think who was continually getting in trouble for little things and whose mother didn't give a crap what he got in trouble for. He killed his mother, and as far as I know he's still in prison. I was putting my preschoolers down for nap near Christmas time, so we're all talking about what they want for Christmas or Hanukkah. We had 2 Jewish students, so I discussed them both equally. One student, who was living his grandparents because his mother was abusive, told me he wanted to play video games. Oh, like on a TV or in your hands, like a DS. He was 5. He sat up, very excited to tell me the story of how he used to have a DS and it was awesome. But one day some men broke into the house and stole it. It was so heartbreaking, especially because he seemed to react as if it happens a lot. I called his grandparents and got permission, but my husband let me give him his old DS he didn't use anymore and all the games he had for it. Kid in grade 1 had intentions of killing people and burning the school down. Not too sure how serious he was. I know he has older siblings, but they weren't troublemakers. When other students started passing the word around he was gonna do these things, the school eventually expelled him. In junior year I started failing a lot of classes and skipped school as much as I could. I was always tried and essentially just gave up school. It was hard because I used to really love school. My favorite teacher, whom I had known since freshman year, always checked up on me. When I started skipping school, she texted me to make sure I was okay. She wasn't my teacher anymore in junior year, and at my school it's normal for students to be friends with teachers. A few months later, things got tougher. Finals were approaching and I realized I had no chance at doing well in school anymore. I wanted to end my life. Not because I was failing, but because I just didn't like myself. My teacher noticed I was often sat me down and talked to me. She didn't force me to speak, but rather she offered an ear. I told her how I was struggling and was always tired and that I didn't want to do anything anymore. She helped me and sat with me while I talked to the school counselor. 2 years later I'm on my way to college in January, because my college in the fall lied about my major. I'm studying to become a Spanish teacher, just like my favorite teacher. She's been a very close friend to me, a sister, all these years, and she's the reason I'm here today. She actually helped me when my last school lied about my major. She helped me get out of there and find a better school. I've seen that teacher pull greatness out of her students and help them succeed. Teachers are very observant of their students. They realize when something is off about their students. A fellow teacher next door to me had a young male student who suddenly began soiling himself during the school day. This child was extremely bright, articulate, very with it kind of kid. This behavior was highly unusual from him. After a few weeks of this, She found out his uncle had moved in with him and his mother. The little boy was very chary about discussing the uncle. Something was definitely up. Inability to control bowel movements, barring medical reasons, is a sign of potential sexual abuse. My colleague, a great teacher but terrified of conflict or confrontation, did not report it to the counselor or family services, as we all advised her to do. Instead, she called the boy's mother and got the uncle on the phone. She didn't mention her concerns to him, but she did leave a message for the mother to call back. When the mother called back, she ham-hawed around and said she'd talk to her son. He never withdrew from school and never came back again. Phone number was disconnected and the teacher didn't report anything to the county truancy or anything. I don't teach anymore, but I still get angry when I think about her letting that kid down. I wish I could remember the little guy's last name. He'd be about the age to have an online presence. I'd love to know if he's okay. When I taught abroad, one of the brightest and most liked students disappeared one day after a couple of weeks with what seemed like a bad cold. Not really a red flag, I suppose, but related. It was a one-room schoolhouse in a fairly remote village. Apparently, her mother accused the lunch lady of putting a spell on her daughter and pulled her out. Obligatory, not a teacher, but my grandmother. My grandmother taught 3rd grade for over 40 years. She loved every minute of it, except for this one kid. His name was Jason. She described this kid as a psychopath. She said he would always draw pictures of knives, guns and death on the desks. One time he tried to cut himself with scissors. Another time he tried to stab another classmate in the chest with a sharpened stick. Of course, she reported every incident to the administration, but this was in a time before Columbine, so they did nothing other than suggesting counseling. During a parent-teacher conference, it was revealed that his parents lived in fear of him because he would hoard sharp objects in his room and threaten to stab anyone who tried to get near him. His parents also revealed that he killed animals for fun. Anyways, this kid was later charged with torturing and murdering 6 different women and went to prison for a long time. I've got a 14-year-old male student that loves everything to do with war and death. The first time I saw his writing, I was shocked. He was writing about killing people, recently helping students around the room, and I see his work. Which is nicer, a sniper rifle or a bomb? Normally a kid like that would be thrown out, but this is Japan. Crap don't work like that. From what I've heard about America, I'm sure he would be expelled by now. Scary thing is that he looks like a normal kid. A kid always thinking about murder. I don't find this too rare. 2 chances. He's gonna be a murderer, or he's going to be a brilliant gore writer who I'll probably follow like a cultist. Graded a lab report by a SE Asian kid, then graded another later that was eerily similar down to the typos. Noticed it was another SE Asian kid. Talked to my fellow TAs, compared the papers of the first 2 Asian kids' friends, and before long there were literally dozens of nearly identical lab reports all across the department. You know, they were all cheating together because they had the same writing errors. You haven't known chaos until dozens of Asians are harassing you in the department because they think it's racist to flunk most of the Asians in an OChem class. Department laughed them out, thankfully. As far as I know, the ringleaders were removed from the university. They might have not been if they had apologized, but they were obnoxious and refused to take responsibility. And everyone else failed the course and went on academic probation. If you're gonna cheat, at least rewrite the lab report you're sharing with 50 people. It's not always the loud ones that act out either. My parents started fighting when I was 10 and my mom started telling me all these things she suspected my father was doing behind her back. It really changed my view of my dad and caused a huge strain on our relationship for years. In the end, she ended up being the one cheating. I was tired and came to school and would fall asleep in class and fail tests. No one seemed to care. I spent all of my time trying to figure out what I could do to make them see eye to eye and understand each other. It consumed me and caused me to sink into depression and anxiety. I felt like I had failed because I couldn't fix it. Sometimes I still feel guilty now for not being able to save everyone. My little brother still hasn't come back from it. TLDR. It's not always the angry and loud ones. And don't fight in front of or through your children. I was a teacher at a preschool, and one 4-year-old girl liked to play horsey with the boys during free time. Only she would make them lay on their backs and bounce up and down on them. And that's how we found out her dad was abusing her. My wife is an elementary school teacher, 3rd grade, who is very good at what she does. The school she works at is on the far lower end of the socio-economic spectrum, so she has seen parents bust into the school cafeteria dropping F-bombs and screaming threats of bodily harm on students and teachers alike. She has seen abusive parents and students alike. She has seen abused kids. But it isn't always so easy to spot. 2 years ago, I walked in from work, and my wife was clearly troubled. There was a boy who would barely speak. He wouldn't look her in the eye. It had gotten worse as the school year went on, and had escalated to the point where he had started defecated on himself several times at school. She wasn't sure whether she should report it to Child Protective Services. Taken as a whole, there seemed to be a good suspicion of abuse, but there wasn't one definite thing that she could point to and say definitively that it was abuse. I suggested better safe than sorry. She made the call. 3 days later, we were several hours away visiting her family for Thanksgiving. And at 7:30 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, her phone rang. It was CPS. They had shown up at dark 30 in the morning to the boy's home. And yes, there was severe neglect and horrific abuse that I don't even want to go into detail about. Needless to say, they had removed him out of the home, and he had started crying in the car as they pulled away from the home. When the CPS worker asked him what was wrong, he told her nothing was wrong but that he was crying because he was so relieved that he didn't have to live there anymore. She and I both cried in the kitchen that Thanksgiving morning. He is doing well now, but I know how close it was because she really struggled over whether she should have made that call up until that worker called her back that morning. No kid deserves that. No kid. She and I now have another child in our home that was placed with us through CPS. We love him as if he was our own. He came from total neglect and nobody caring. Now, we are giving him the knowledge that he has a bed to sleep in, clothes to wear and food to eat. We are taking care of his present, and we are going to try with everything within us to make sure he has a future. I'm not quite a teacher, but I look after a group of 8th graders. I'm a prefect. One of them was a really angry kid who would always try to fight people. He would never study, despite the protests of his family, and hated school. Most people thought he was just an angry kid, until one day he let slip that he'd been self-harming and had suicidal thoughts. He withdrew from school to get counseling help and we haven't seen him since. As we were walking to the library, a student noticed a baby bird had fallen out of a nest. He proceeded to pick the baby bird up and bite its head off. Seriously. After an out-of-town track meet, the coach took my sister's team to have their picture taken at one of those places where they could dress up and do a theme picture. The way my sister tells it, the girls wanted to dress up as something wholesome but the coach was very insistent that they do the Wild West theme. They didn't, so he dressed as a sheriff and 20 of these 14-18-year-old girls dressed as Wild West prostitutes. My parents were obviously furious. When a kid shows up with a couple cuts, ain't no deal. When a kid starts showing up with cuts up their wrist and arms, maybe keep an eye on it. When the number or cuts and scars all over the kid just keep getting higher, and the kid who was once a 90+ average student is dropping to near failing, something is probably up. I was giving a lecture at a school about the English royal family throughout history. The lecture was split into 5 parts, so it took 5 days. This boy was late every single day until the last one. On the last day he was early, but covered in bruises. Technically I should have disregarded this, but I went over to him at a break and started talking to him. He looked delighted that someone finally talked to him. I found out he was ruthlessly bullied by the teachers and students. He was late to avoid them, but once the parents found out he was late they forced him to go early. He was attacked by some kids and the onlooking teachers just laughed at him. I got so sick that I cancelled all future lectures I had at the school and can taste CPS. Sadly, I was too late. From what I heard the next morning he ran away and hanged himself in the woods. This is more of a story than a red flag. My father helped what now would be called at-risk youths by taking them on wilderness trips for a couple of weeks. This was during the late 60s and early 70s. The teachers would nominate kids to go on the trips, and it was supposed to be kids that just needed a little confidence boost that maybe hiking up a mountain or paddling down a river would solve. However, the teachers mostly chose the kids they wanted out of their classrooms. One particular kid was the bully of his grade, a heavy-set kid about 13 years old. This kid was a problem from day one. He tried to take a small knife with him on the trip. His mother tipped off my dad that he had the knife. It took several hours for him to finally admit he had the knife and hand it over. Once they got to their campsite, the kid was trying to start fights with the smaller kids. My father had to break it up and told them to save their energy because tomorrow was going to be a long day. It was a 6-hour hike. Not a super long hike, but for an overweight 13-year-old it was super long. He was the first to complain. After a couple of hours he was asking if someone could help him lighten his pack. By the end of the hike he was exhausted. The other kids realized that the bully was weaker than them, and for the rest of the trip they didn't take any of his crap. My father opened up an outdoor clothing and equipment store a few later, and from time to time a few of these kids, now men, that he took on trips would come into the store and thank him for what he gave them. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.